Hey y'all, I'm Lauren and welcome to Cantina Cast. Today I'm talking about Temptation of the Force, written by Tessa Gratton. This is the second adult High Republic novel of Phase 3, and this novel comes out on June 11th. I recently released a pre-release video where I'm talking about what you should read before this novel and just kind of general expectations going into the novel. So if you're looking for a completely spoiler-free video, check out that pre-release video, which is just completely general information. There's no risk of getting spoiled for anything. But as usual with my review videos, I'm just going to first give my general thoughts about the novel, a brief kind of rundown of what you can expect from it. And then before I start talking about plot and spoilers, I'll warn you so that way if you haven't read it yet and you're planning to, you can skip the spoiler part. First, I do recommend reading the High Republic comic for Phase 3 before going into this one, as well as Shadows of Starlight, which is the other shorter comic series part of Phase 3, and also the adult novel that came before this called Eye of Darkness. As usual with the High Republic, the other books and novels that have been coming out, they are always helpful to have read before going into the next installment, just because if you want the full backstory of some of the key events that are going on, sometimes those things do happen in other comics and books, which if you've been following High Republic, then you already know how that goes. It's really just more of the same in that regard. So it's up to you how much of it you want to read. If you don't have to read all of it if you don't want to, you're still going to be able to follow the story. But if you do want more clarification on how certain things happened and you want more explanation, then it probably would be good to just be caught up on everything. So it's really up to the individual person as to how much background information you want to have going into this. Like, for example, there's a lot of stuff that comes up from the comic The Blade, which was actually a Phase 2 comic. And it's not required reading before going into this one. You're going to be able to follow the story. But if you want full background on Porter Engle and kind of what his situation was in his past, then you would want to read The Blade. Or there's other characters that are introduced in this novel that were previously in the YA novel Defy the Storm, which actually was the last release that came out before this one. And if you're not following the YA novels, you're not going to have any trouble getting to know these characters. Tessa Gratton does a good job of introducing the characters and letting you know what's important about them. But if you want the full backstory of the characters, then you're going to want to read Defy the Storm. That's kind of what I mean by it's up to your personal preference how much you want to get into it. I will say, though, that Defy the Storm did end up relating more to this book than I originally thought it would. So you might want to take that under consideration. Where we start off in this novel is the occlusion zone is still up. The Republic is trying to figure out what they're going to do about it. They're not making much progress. Marchion Rowe is still outsmarting them. We're really still in the same boat with all of that. And we are following Avar and Elzar. We're following Bell and Buryaga. And then we also find out the fate of Porter Engle, which that was a cliffhanger at the end of Eye of Darkness. And one thing I mentioned in my pre-release video is that this book really does just feel like a continuation of the story that George Mann started in Eye of Darkness. So I really appreciated that because it felt very seamless. I felt like I was reading a direct sequel to the book that came before it, which is nice because in High Republic it's not always that way. So my own personal opinions about this novel. In the beginning, I'm not gonna lie, I did kind of have a hard time feeling fully invested. I felt like we were kind of repeating the same problems that we've been having in several books, which I do believe that was intentional on the author's part, but I just was kind of feeling like we're making no progress, which they aren't at first. We're making no progress. I'm tired of Marchion Row. I'm tired of the Nameless. I just want to go home. Like, I was just not really immersed in the story because I was just wanting something to happen. I was wanting something to change. And I almost feel like Tessa Gratton did too good of a job of making it feel bleak because I was kind of like pulling my hair out trying to like get through to the good part. But once I got to around that halfway mark, this book really turned into a page turner. So if you're reading this and in the beginning you're kind of like, oh, like what is going to happen? I just need something to happen. If you're having that feeling like I did, stick with it because once you get further into the book, there is a point where things start happening very quickly and we do start making a lot of progress. So that's just something to be aware of going into this one. So, in that way, the second half of the book, which was really exciting and riveting, and we had a lot going on, that did make up for the first half that I personally was kind of having a hard time with. So, overall, I still really enjoyed the book as a whole. One more thing to also keep in mind about this book is if you're someone who is somewhat sensitive to violent scenes in books, I am going to be giving a little bit of a warning about that right after my spoiler tag. I'll tell you exactly what I'm referring to. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm the type of person that is sensitive, probably more sensitive than the average person to violence in media. And there's a lot of shows that I can't watch because of it. There's some books that I choose not to read because of it. So it's just something that I feel strongly about. And there were a couple scenes in this book that I felt like personally for me were kind of pushing beyond what I'm comfortable with. So I just want to, as a courtesy to anyone else that might feel that way, I do just want to warn y'all of that particular material going into this one. So if you're someone who is also sensitive to these things, you can kind of know what you're getting yourself into. And if you want to skip a chapter, you could just skip that chapter. So if you'd like to hear more about that, I am going to go in more detail about that right after my spoiler tag. Before I start getting into spoilers, the last thing I wanted to mention is that in a few weeks, Albert and I are going to be covering this novel on the main show. And when Albert and I do coverage, we go in a lot more detail than I do in my sort of overviews. Like, we literally will talk about this for probably 2 hours. That's not even an exaggeration. So, if you're wanting to get more into the weeds and hear more details and more kind of back and forth discussion about individual scenes in this book, then check out our review that's going to be coming up that we're going to do together. Because in this video, I'm mainly going to be giving you the highlights and the need to know information. But if I got into every single little thing in this book that I thought was really powerful or significant, we would be here all night. So at this point, I am going to finally start talking spoilers and I'm going to give an overview of the plot. So if you are not wanting to hear any spoilers, now is your time to turn back. Okay, so now before I get into my full overview of the plot, I do want to give some details about the violent scenes that I was talking about. So what I'm referring to is that there are two instances in this novel where there is animal cruelty on the page. And in one of those instances, the animal ends up being okay. In the other instance, the animal does not. And this is something that was kind of a bummer for me because usually I view Star Wars as a safe space in terms of I know that if something violent is going to happen in Star Wars, it's going to be something that's really important to the plot. And a really good example of this is when Prod Veter was killed in Eye of Darkness. That was a really hard scene to read. That is a scene that I found very difficult, but I was okay with it because it was really important to the overall story. It ended up being a pivotal moment in the Jedi having more of an understanding of the Nameless. It ended up being a pivotal moment in how the Republic responded. So it was just an important scene for many reasons. And so, because of that, I was able to understand why it was such a graphic scene, why that was done to this character, and I was able to accept that it was it was for the sake of the storytelling. But in these two animal cruelty scenes in this novel, I don't really feel that way. I personally feel like that the animal cruelty that we see happen on the page, if those scenes were just taken out, the story probably wouldn't really be any different. And in fact, I am going to suggest to you that if you are sensitive to violence, especially if you're sensitive to animal cruelty, then you might just want to completely skip over chapter 2 and chapter 15. Chapter 2 involves animal cruelty towards a cat, and chapter 15 involves animal cruelty towards a dog. And honestly, if you just want to skip over those two chapters, I really don't think your experience of the book would be any different. You really would not be missing any key plot details or anything like that. And that is why I found this to be a bummer, is because to me, these scenes didn't really feel necessary. It felt like I just felt upset when I read them, and I didn't really feel like I gained anything for that. So that's just my 2 cents. And that's also me being fully aware of the fact that I am particularly sensitive to these types of things. So a lot of people might not feel the same way as me, and that's totally fine. Everybody's different in terms of what they want to put in their mind. Um, and that's a personal decision and a personal preference that everyone has. And that's just something I wanted to warn y'all about. So that way, if you do like to be a little bit more particular about reading that type of material, you do have the choice to skip over it if you would prefer to do so. I do want to say that even though those two scenes did disappoint me with the type of content that found its way into a Star Wars book, even though that really bummed me out, they did not negatively affect my enjoyment of the book as a whole. Once I got past that, I still really enjoyed the book. There were a lot of parts of this book that I really, really liked and got super into and super excited about. So I don't want my warning to deter anyone from reading it. I would just say if you're at all concerned, then just skip over those chapters and just move on with your life and enjoy the rest of the story. Okay, so now that that's been discussed, we can just move on from that. So now I am going to start talking about the actual plot itself now that my little warning is out of the way. So the book opens with Porter Ingle, and he has survived. And Kara Santeca, who was actually a character who was featured pretty prominently in Defy the Storm, Kara Santeca has nursed him back to health for the past month. Kara is a character who he is working in the occlusion zone trying to help people get out, and he's working with Rill and Bellin, both of those characters from Eye of Darkness. And the three of them have a pretty sophisticated smuggling operation set up where they're getting people out of the occlusion zone. So once Porter wakes up, Kara's like, hey, you should totally join us. Like, we could really use your help. We really need you out there. Porter's like, I'm not joining. I don't want to do this. Don't even tell anyone I'm alive. I have my own thing to take care of. And that is when Porter runs off and he is going to hunt down General Vice because she survived as well. And the two of them still have unfinished business. This starts a very long journey that takes place throughout this whole book of Porter Ingle chasing down General Vice, trying to catch her getting away at the last minute, and there's just like a back and forth that goes on for a very long time, which is still unresolved. We also have Avar Chris, of course, and she has been back for 6 weeks now. And during that time, she's actually been continuing to go on missions back and forth across the storm wall. And this is very dangerous every time because, of course, getting back and forth is not just like a simple thing. It does require a Jedi to be able to navigate through nihil space because of the way that the path codes are set up. She's about to go on her 7th mission, but this one is actually going to be the most dangerous one yet. But even though it's dangerous, she really feels like she's in the right place now. She believes that it's better for her to take on this type of a role rather than a glorified leadership role like how she was doing back in phase 1. So she feels like she's really found what she's supposed to be doing. Now that she's back, she's also very close with Elzar again. And the two of them have worked past their issues that they were having in previous High Republic stories. And Avar is really not worried about attachment to him anymore. She feels like she's really doing the right thing by being with him. She's at peace with the fact that she loves him. I am very skeptical about this. I am waiting for this to blow up. I'm not buying it at all. But for this next mission, she's actually going to be testing new technology that is supposed to help them get across the storm wall in an easier way. And this was actually developed by Avon Staros, who is Gira Staros' daughter. But she's going by the name Avon Sunvale because she doesn't want anyone to know that she is Gira Staros' daughter. And she's developed this device that mimics a path drive, which is what the Nihil have that helps them get around the occlusion zone. And so they're going to test it out for the first time. So they're basically just going to try it out and pray that it works. Well, right when they're in the middle of getting this mission started, Xylan Graf actually crashes through the storm wall, comes out on the other side, and calms the ship that they're all in and is like, hey, I'm escaping from the Nihil and I'm going to tell you how to destroy the storm wall. This is a very strange situation because Xylan Graf has been imprisoned by the Nihil for a while now. Xylan Graf is also someone that you never really know what side he's on. Even as a reader, it can be difficult to tell what exactly his motivations are. I do feel like that finally does get resolved in this book, though, which I appreciated because in the past, before Xylan has kind of frustrated me just because I'm kind of like, what does this guy want? I don't even know. I can't put it together. But I feel like in this book, we do finally get some clarification on that later on. But so yeah, because of that, everybody has mixed emotions when he shows up about we don't really want to accept this guy's help, but we also need his help. So they let him come on board and they're going to listen to what he has to say. And he does tell them that he actually is the one that has been sending path codes to their smuggling partners on the other side of the occlusion zone. So that would be Real, Bellin, and Care. And by the way, it should be mentioned as well that Xylan and Care are married, although they do try to keep their marriage on the down low. They don't really tell a lot of people about it because Santekas and Grafs are pretty much enemies. But Xylan does ask the crew to take him to Avon. And the reason he needs to see Avon is because he said that he knows how to completely bring the storm wall down, which involves the fact that the storm wall is built around what is called a home key. Best way I can think of to explain that is it's sort of like a pattern that's in the storm wall that Avon needs to decipher. And Xylan believes that Avon is the only person that's going to be able to figure this out because Avon is really good at this kind of thing. And once Avon figures out how the home key works, then she's going to have the key to actually bring down the storm wall. It's kind of complicated to explain. There's like math and numbers and technology involved. So my explanation is probably lacking, but long story short, that's pretty much the main gist of it. So he's going to help them and they're like, okay, what do you want? What do you want in return for this? And he says he wants to be pardoned for his crimes and he wants Naboo to be liberated because Naboo is currently being invaded by the Nihil. When they ask him what does he want on Naboo, his answer is my dog is there. Well, this is also Care's home planet too. Of course, we know that Xylan loves his dog Plinka very much. But at the same time, Kara's also there too, but Xylan doesn't really want to admit that. Then, of course, we also have Elzar Mann. He is still struggling with the dark side, and his guilt and shame around what happened with Chancey Yarrow on Starlight. He's really not over that yet. He's also not over the mistake that he made in Eye of Darkness, which cost a lot of people their lives when they were trying to get across the storm wall. And he's just afraid. He's afraid that he's filled with so much rage that at some point he's going to fall to the dark side and it's kind of just like an inevitability. But he also doesn't really know what to do about it either. He's just doing his best to try to tread water. He does decide that he's going to tell the council, which previously Vernestra had threatened Elzar. If you don't tell the council, I will, because Vernestra knows the truth of what happened with Chancey Yarrow. And so Vernestra kind of encouraged that interaction with Vernestra, did encourage Elzar to admit it to the council. And he's not just doing this just because she said that. You can tell that he also is like, yeah, she's right. I really should tell the council. So he does go tell them. And when he's in the middle of trying to admit to them what he's done, they offer him a seat on the council. And he's like, okay, hang on, that is not what we need to be talking about right now. And that's when he admits the whole story about Chancey. And weirdly enough, the council's pretty understanding about this. And what they say is that everybody makes mistakes, which, I mean, that sounds so cliche when I say it like that. But Yoda's response is pretty much that choosing the light and making any kind of a choice, there is always going to be room for mistakes. And so that statement does seem to help Elzar feel better. The meeting ends and Elzar agrees to consider being on the council, which he considers several times throughout the course of this book, but ultimately he ends up telling them no later on. Another thing too going on with Elzar is him and Avar are getting closer, but there is kind of like a push and pull between the two of them because Avar is pretty at peace with the fact that she loves Elzar. She doesn't feel like it's attachment. She feels like it's something different. And Elzar isn't really on the same page on that front yet. He's still kind of concerned about, if I just do this with Avar, is this going to be bringing me closer to the dark side? That's something that is a little bit of a point of tension for them throughout a lot of this book. We also have Kair Santeca, who I already mentioned earlier, but he is a character that has a bigger role in Defy the Storm, so I was glad to see that role be carried over into this book and kind of get to spend some more time with this character. And in this book, he does go to Naboo because it's being invaded by the Nihil, and his two uncles live there, and they have this huge mansion. It's actually, we see this mansion for a brief time back in phase 1 in Light of the Jedi. But Care convinces them to, first of all, leave Naboo, go to safety, and also while you're at it, why don't you send a bunch of your funds to people that are resisting the Nihil? So kind of a win-win situation. Well, once they leave, General Vice does take over their mansion, and she decides that that's where she's actually going to set up her home base. So once Care arrives, Vice is waiting for him. Care is taken prisoner, and Plinka is also hurt as well. This is one of the scenes that I was talking about at the beginning of my video, just to try to like upset Care. Vice does wound Plinka. That's Xylan's dog. And thankfully Plinka is okay. While Care is being kept prisoner, he is able to get a hold of a comm, and he contacts Bellin and is pretty much like, disassociate yourself from me because I've been caught. They're going to find out you're involved. Like, just don't contact me again for your own safety. And then we later also find out that the reason that Vice is keeping Care prisoner is because she believes that the Jedi are going to come rescue him, because she has an inkling that he's been working with the Jedi to smuggle people out of the occlusion zone. So she's like, well, if I just keep him here as bait, then Avar Chris and Porter Ingle are probably going to show up and try to save him. And Vice is absolutely dying to confront Porter again. I mean, this whole obsession of that General Vice and Porter Ingle wanting to kill each other, it is definitely two-sided. The two of them are obsessed with finding the other one and fighting again. Then, of course, we have Marchion Ro, unfortunately, who I'm not gonna lie, I am getting tired of. He is, throughout this book, he's trying to figure out what's going on with the Blight. So he's kind of out of the action for a lot of the book because he's focused on researching should probably be in finger quotes, the Blight. And as part of his research, he's doing experiments, and he's doing these experiments on people and animals. That's the other scene I was talking about with the cat, unfortunately. And he's trying to figure out how the Blight kills people, what it kills, how long it takes, how it works, how it spreads, all of that. So throughout this book, he's going to different planets that the Blight has infected, and is just kind of trying to understand what's going on. He feels like this Blight is going to be a really valuable resource for him because it's something that the Republic doesn't have a solution to. And it's going to be even harder to come up with a solution for that than the Nameless. And so this thing about the Blight is it was introduced in Defy the Storm. It causes everything to crumble, kind of like how the Nameless works. Like it appears very similar, but it's actually not quite the same thing. They seem to be related in some way, but also different somehow. That's something that I think we're going to get some more clarification on later on. My thing about this whole thing with the Blight is I just felt like it was a little bit late to be introducing another big, massive, huge problem when, I mean, we're well into phase 3, which is supposed to be the last phase, unless that's going to change. I don't know. But I was like, how are we? I mean, we're still just trying to figure out the Nameless. We've been trying to figure out the Nameless since phase 1. So the blight to me, it just seems like we're kind of starting too many plot threads and I don't know how we're going to wrap them all up. I could be totally proven wrong. I hope that I am, but right now I'm just kind of like I don't really understand why we're introducing this. I felt like the issues that we're already dealing with were compelling enough on their own. So, I don't know. I'm not really crazy about the whole blight being introduced, but I'm willing to see where it goes. But I mean, that's just my 2 cents on that whole thing. But while Markion is going around researching the blight, he's hallucinating Marta Rowe, who that's his grandmother who we got to know in phase 2. The hallucinations of Marta, they seem to be getting more powerful as time is going on. He's seeing her more often. The hallucinations seem like they're kind of immersive at times. There's a legend that the Everini, that's the species that Markion Rowe is, that the Everini can see the dead. And so this is kind of playing into that. And she's also giving him clues about the blight just in weird little things that she says. Like at one point, it almost kind of sounds like maybe Marta herself had something to do with the start of the blight. So that does not get confirmed in this book, but I'm wondering if that's something that we're going to find out later on because it seems to kind of be hinted at. Markian has also been hearing rumors that the Drengir are back, and he's been seeing evidence that they are back. And he's considering how could the Drengir be useful to him. The Drengir were the big plant monsters back from phase 1 that were dark side creatures that caused a lot of damage in phase 1. At one point, it seemed like they kind of disappeared, but now they are making a comeback. Another thing that Markion is doing is he's also doing experiments on the Nameless themselves to see if the blight affects them. And the Nameless are very frightened by this. You can tell that they don't appreciate what is being done to them. And it's kind of interesting because in this book, there are moments where you kind of feel sorry for the Nameless. And I know that that sounds super weird to say because they're like scary monsters that eat Jedi, but in this book, they almost kind of seem a little bit more like animals at times. Not all the time, but there are moments where you kind of are like, the Nihil have taken these creatures that were meant to be on this other planet, Planet X, which we learned about in phase 2. They took them away from their home planet where they served an ecological role in the way that they ate things. And they're turning it against the Jedi and they're doing horrible experiments on them. They're doing all this crazy stuff to them. They're not treating them well. They're starving them a lot of the times. And these creatures are just miserable. And I mean they probably don't deserve that. I mean, even though they eat Jedi in a really gruesome way, I mean, they probably don't deserve what they're going through right now either. So that was kind of an interesting thing that was raised in this book. How far is too far exactly? Because I kind of feel like we're going to start seeing some stuff that's going to make us realize that the Nameless, they're really just they've been dragged into a situation and they're really just being killed and treated horribly by both sides. In the course of all these experiments, Markion does discover that if you're using the Rod of Power, which controls the leveler, it also prevents the blight from hurting you. So there's another clue that the leveler and the blight are somehow related, although we don't know exactly how yet, especially because the leveler is afraid of the blight. That kind of, I don't know, throws a wrench into any theories that I could have even come up with about this because I don't know what would make the leveler afraid of the blight, even though the leveler also doesn't seem to be affected by the blight either. And as a result of all of his experiments, by the time we get to the end of the book, Markion is capable of seeding the blight on other planets. Since he can touch it without it hurting him because he has the Rod of Power, he is able to spread it wherever he wants. So you just know where that's going. We also have Gira Staros in this novel as well. And she, at this point, she does not know what Markion is thinking. She feels like she can't predict him anymore. She feels like she used to really have him nailed down and kind of understand what he was going to do, but now those days are over. But her structure that she's introduced to the Nihil when she created the different branches of government, that does actually seem to be working the way that she wanted it to work. So she at least did have some sort of an impact on the Nihil, even though Markion himself won't really give her the time of day. Gira is also still worried about Avon, her daughter, who is in the Republic space now, and Avon left Gira because Avon just completely did not agree with what Gira was doing, and understandably so. And that has really impacted Gira because even though Gira is a terrible person, deep down she loves her daughter and she wants the best for her daughter. And that is actually the reason that Gira is doing everything that she's doing, is because she has this desperate, obsessive need to provide as much as she can for Avon, to the point to where it's influencing her to do some horrible things for, I don't know, monetary and political gain. Which I do feel like Tessa Gratton did such a good job of really making Gira's motivations clear. And even though you don't agree with them, you can see at least where she's coming from. That's really the first time that I felt this way about Gira, because I know that her motivations have been said elsewhere, but I've just always kind of been like, I don't know, for some reason, I just felt like something was missing. Like I wasn't really, it wasn't just meshing in my mind in terms of like, why would she support this horrible organization? Why would she support this horrible dictator? But in this book, I just felt like the way it was explained, and the scene that we do get later on in the book of Gira and Avon actually having a conversation about this, I did feel like her motivation was much more clear to see and also easier to understand too. We also have Buryaga and Belle, and they are going around, they're still on the tractate, going around to different planets that are being affected by the Nihil, or that are soon to probably be affected by the storm wall. And one of the planets that they visit is called Oan. And the people that live on this planet, they have a very close symbiotic relationship with the trees on their planet. And so it's a really unique society. So that was kind of cool to see how the society worked. These people, they really need the trees and the trees really need them. And so because of that, it's a pretty big deal that there was evidence of the Drengir on this planet, because of course the Drengir, they just destroy everything and they don't leave until everything's destroyed. So Belle and Burry show up to try to help them address this. And we do get a confirmation that the reason that the Drengir are back is because during the fall of Starlight, the progenitor, which is kind of like the main Drengir that the rest of the hive mind is connected to, was imprisoned on Starlight Beacon, and they were supposed to be transferred to another prison elsewhere. But then, of course, Starlight Beacon fell and the progenitor survived the crash. And so that is why the Drengir are not fully gone yet. When Belle and Burry see evidence of this, they're like, why don't you leave? Get away from this. Also, the storm wall's coming. Like, you should just get out of here. And the people are like, no, we are not going to do that. We need the trees. The trees need us. We can't leave. It's not even an option. And so this was very emotional for Belle and Buryaga, because they really, really want to help these people, but they feel like they just can't. Like, they feel like their hands are tied and there's not really anything that can be done. So after this, they continue looking for Drengir. They find one that's actually dying, and it's super weird because it looks like it's sick or something. So there's clearly something not right. And this is kind of the first clue that there's something is going on with the Drengir as a whole. And as they're going around looking for more evidence of other Drengir, they're finding that what's happening is the Drengir are going to planets and then they're leaving early, because typically Drengir, they don't leave until they've eaten everything that there is to eat, and then they'll leave in search of more food. But that's not what's happening anymore. The Drengir will go somewhere, stay for a minute, and then turn right back around and leave. And so that's another weird clue that something is not right here. Eventually, they find evidence of the blight, and there is a connection between whenever the blight is, whenever it's first reached a planet, the Drengir actually feel that first. And so the Drengir immediately leave. So the Drengir are kind of like a weird sign almost that the Blight is about to overtake a planet. So meanwhile, while all of that is going on, Avon is successful with cracking the home key and figuring out how to do that. So they are going to go take down the storm wall. Again, very scary mission. They may die, it may fail, they may just crash into the storm wall and explode. We don't know. But thankfully, of course, they pull it off and it works. It turns out that Avon was right with the way that she deciphered the pattern. So Avar is now going to go fight on Naboo. They are going to try to liberate Naboo from the Nihil, which this is not just because of what Xylan asked. It's actually going to be a political advantage and a military advantage as well, because of course Naboo is a pretty key planet. So it makes sense that they're like, okay, we need to make sure that this planet is liberated. And it just so happens that that also is in line with what Xylan wanted anyway. And then Elzar and a team, they go and sabotage the lightning crash, which that is the ship that the crystals that are powering the storm wall is on. So when Elzar and the team show up, they just completely destroy the lightning crash pretty quickly. Like, they know immediately. They're like, that was way too easy. They just let us destroy that. They didn't even try to fight back. So something isn't right there, but they do successfully bring down the storm wall, at least temporarily. Once Avar gets to Naboo, Porter Engle coincidentally gets there at the same time and is also fighting Vice while this whole battle is going on. And they have a really long fight, like very Phantom Menace, Darth Maul vibes. They have a really long fight that takes place all over the house. And eventually, unfortunately, Vice does get away. She flees because Porter's pretty much about to beat her. But because of what's going on with the battle, there was actually a tracker on her ship. So Porter is going to be able to follow her at least. But before she gets away when they're fighting, when she's distracted, Care is able to get into the weapons stash, which is hidden in the Santeca library. So Care is now actually able to actually help with the battle instead of just being a prisoner. Shortly after this, Bell and Burry, who are also on Naboo, Care, and Vernestra, who is also there, they have an encounter with a Nameless. And this is something that is a really close call, but the group of them together are actually able to do something about it. And this is a pretty pivotal moment in terms of knowing how to even go up against the Nameless. Because what happens is Burry and Bell are there, and Vernestra is like a little bit further away, so she's not affected quite as much as they are, but Burry and Bell are closest to it. And Care is with Vernestra. And Bell is screaming because Bell feels like he's dying. Because of Burry's skill with emotions, he's able to take Bell's fear and panic and all of that, and he's able to actually kind of channel it into giving him the strength to face off with the Nameless. It's explained a lot better in the actual book than I'm explaining it now, but it's basically just because Burryaga has a really great skill with empathy and helping others with their emotions. It's just something that he's really good at. So he has a unique skill that he's able to do this. It sounds like not all Jedi would be able to actually pull this off, but Burryaga is just the right person to be able to do it. And so in this moment when Burryaga is able to face off with the Nameless, he just throws his lightsaber, and the lightsaber actually hits the Nameless and kills it. And in this moment, I mean, kind of back to what I was saying earlier about feeling sorry for the Nameless, Burryaga does have like a moment of guilt for killing the Nameless, and he even he has a moment where he's like, what am I thinking? Like, why do I feel sorry? Like, this creature like has killed my friends, has killed other Jedi. I mean, this is a horrible thing that's going on. But when he was just looking at it dead, he's like, this creature has been used against its will. And he feels sorry for it in that moment. Fortunately, the battle is successful, so Naboo is freed, and Avar and Elzar are reunited, and Care and Xylan are also reunited. And as far as Avar and Elzar go, after some of that back and forth that happened earlier in the book, once the two of them are reunited on Naboo, they do come to the conclusion that their relationship is not attachment. It's just like pure love. And the reason they feel that way is because their relationship brings them closer to the light. I don't know about that. We will see. I mean, they seem pretty convinced of this, but I'm wondering if they're being delusional because yeah, like they're together, so it's easy to be like, yeah, like things are great. How could this be bad? But like if something bad happens to one of them, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm just not convinced yet. I feel like there is a chance that this could completely blow up in their faces. I actually think there's a pretty large chance that it's going to blow up in their faces because the way they're talking, to me, their explanations for why they feel like this is not attachment, to me, it just doesn't really make sense. I do kind of, I agree that the Jedi do take the attachment thing way too far, but I do kind of get where they're coming from when they're saying you need to be very careful with attachment because it can make you do things that you wouldn't normally want to do because you're trying to preserve your own attachment. Like I can see where they're coming from on that. So because of that, I don't know about this whole a- Avar and Elzar thing. I feel like it doesn't matter what you call it. To me, the two of them seem pretty obsessed with each other and they seem to prioritize each other over all else. So, I mean, they can say whatever they want, but to me, like their actions are reflective of what they're actually prioritizing and thinking. So, I don't know. We will see. Maybe I'll get proven wrong. Maybe it turns out that they actually are not attached, but to me, it just doesn't really sound like that. And to me, their explanations aren't really clearing that up for me quite yet. I will say though, I mean, I guess I have to admit that at one point, Elzar does have a conversation with Yoda about this that is a pretty positive conversation. And Yoda even says that anything that brings you closer to the light is probably okay. I mean, of course, that's a paraphrase, but that's pretty much the gist of the conversation, which I was actually surprised that Yoda had that reaction. I wasn't really expecting that. Shortly after this, Markion Ro does get the Stormwall back up by changing the home key. So it turns out that he could just change that whenever he wanted. And the new home key, what it's actually based on is the tattoos that he has on his own body. So when he does this, we get kind of a crazy flashback of Mari Santeca instructing someone of what to tattoo on him. And it's kind of just like this secret original path key that they tattooed on him. And I guess the reason that they tattooed it on him was kind of like for safekeeping in a morbid way, and so, yeah, he just changed it to that. So he's basically like, yeah, the Republic will never be able to figure this out unless I'm dead. And he doesn't think that that's ever going to happen. So that's pretty annoying. He can just change it whenever he wants. I don't know. This guy's got to have a weakness. Like, I'm waiting for the weakness. There's got to be something. He can't be this invincible for this long. So I'm just ready to at least see what the weakness is because right now it seems like nothing can stick to this guy. But of course, everyone on Naboo is freaking out, and eventually Avar and Vernestra, they have to get people back across the storm wall the old-fashioned way, which is once again very scary, but they do pull it off. Unfortunately, this whole thing does cause a pretty big fight between Xylan and Care. Because Xylan is like, let's get back across the storm wall. Me, you, and Plinka gotta get to safety. Let's do it. And Care is like, no, I have to stay here and keep helping people. Xylan can't really understand that because Care just almost got killed. Plinka almost got killed. Xylan does not understand where the heck Care is coming from, but Care views it a totally different way. Care views it as, this is my purpose. This is what I have to do. Because of this disagreement, Xylan ends up just, I don't know, kidnapping Care and taking Care across a storm wall with him. So the two of them are together, but Care's pretty pissed off because he's like, you just took me away against my will. So it'll be interesting to see how the two of them go forward after something like that. Honestly though, I kind of get it a little bit because if something bad happened to my pet, you would not be able to tell me anything. We are getting away from whatever that was. So even though I don't agree with Xylan, I can kind of see why he was having like a freak out moment. Once everybody's back in Republic space, Uri and Bell, they do return to Oan. That's the tree planet from earlier in the book. And unfortunately, the reason that they have to go back is because the blight has now come to that planet, which is kind of like the sign from earlier when that Drengir was dying. And Buryaga is really beside himself about this because he knows that the people can't leave even if they wanted to, which they can't leave and they don't want to leave. And Buryaga is just really upset about this because he wants to help these people so badly. And so what he does is he actually uses all of his might to try to push the blight back with the force. And this takes so much out of him that it makes him sick. I mean, he's like about to kill himself doing this because he so desperately wants to make a difference for these people. And all of this effort, it does actually make a slight difference, but not very much of a difference. Like, not enough of a difference to actually save the planet. It basically was just enough to show that yes, this is something that's possible, but it is not possible with just one person. So I'm hoping that this is something that we get addressed quickly in other books, because I'm ready to I really am concerned about where this blight plotline is going this late into the game. So I'm glad that we've at least already gotten maybe a clue for how it could be resolved. Then after this, we have a super weird dinner between Lena So, Gira Staros, and Elzar Mann. I still don't know why Lena is even talking to Gira. I think that that is just stupid. But she is. I think she probably just feels like she has no other options and that's why she's doing it. But I think it's just crazy. The dinner goes weird, but during the dinner, Elzar does get the impression, based on what Gira is saying about her daughter Avon, he starts thinking maybe this is the way to crack Gira. Maybe we have to get to Gira through Avon. Because now, after his experience with Avar, Elzar's belief is that loving people makes you a better person. And he can see that about Gira because that's the only thing that Gira loves is Avon. And everything that Gira does, it's for Avon. So Elzar's like, well, if Avon says something to her, maybe that will actually get through to her. So after the dinner, Elzar talks to Avon, presents his case. Avon is not thrilled at first, because Avon thinks that Gira is a lost cause. Avon has pretty much already accepted this, and now Elzar Mann is asking her to try to get through to her. So Avon isn't really thrilled about that at first, but she does agree to do it. And she goes to Gira and actually speaks with her. And this is the scene I was talking about earlier where I feel like Gira's motivations become very clear. It's not before, like, they were stated, as I said, they were stated before, but I just felt like it was still kind of murky. In this scene, to me, it's like beyond the shadow of a doubt. We do see that Gira is doing everything that she's doing because she believes that it is best for Avon, which Avon doesn't even agree with that, but that is what Gira actually thinks. And Avon cares more about doing the right thing, regardless of what the price of that is. And Avon does confront Gira about that, and Avon really strongly tells Gira, you need to do the right thing. Especially if you want anything to do with me, you need to do the right thing. And eventually, Gira does give a data stick to Avon, and Avon delivers it to Elzar. And what's on the data stick is everything that Gira knows about where Marchion Ro has recently been. I do believe that Gira did this out of love for Avon based on things that Gira has said about Avon and to Avon earlier in the book. But we also do know that Gira is getting sick and tired of Marchion Ro as well. So, I mean, I do still think that maybe it's kind of like it's a convenient thing for her to give up because she doesn't really like him anyway. So we'll see if that actually is true, but that was just kind of my thought as I read this. But based on the information on this data stick on where Marchion has been, they are able to figure out where he's probably going to be next, or at least where he just recently was. And so they send a team once again to go try to figure this out. And they're also trying to understand why he was going to all of these planets. They do know that the reason he was going did have something to do with the blight, because all of these planets have been affected by the blight, but they don't know what exactly he's doing there with the blight. While they're there, they do have an encounter with a nameless. And when you see the nameless, you're kind of like, oh crap, is Marchion Ro just still on this planet somewhere else? Well, he is, actually. We are soon to find out. But at this point, it's just Avar and Elzar, and then Bel and Buryaga. The four of them have the encounter with the Nameless. And while that's happening, Vernestra is off in the forest chasing a Drengir down. So when the four of them encounter the Nameless, they do take what Buryaga previously told them about leaning into the fear. And they lean into the fear, they try to channel the fear into like the energy to actually take action. And one thing that really adds to this is Bel and Buryaga have a very strong friendship, and Avar and Elzar, they have a very strong romantic relationship. So you have a group of four people who care about each other very deeply. So the fear and the suffering of each other, that does really motivate the four of them to actually do something. It's kind of like the perfect storm of things coming together for them to actually be able to do something about the Nameless rather than just giving into the fear and letting the fear consume them, as has unfortunately happened with a lot of other Jedi. And so when the four of them are facing off against the Nameless, Elzar is able to find the strength to use his lightsaber against the Nameless because Avar is kind of taking on some of that fear energy from him and kind of freeing him up in a way to be able to actually confront it. And so Elzar does kill the Nameless. Avar is really hurt, but she is okay. But she does get like kind of like the brunt of the damage from this encounter. And it's very clear at the end of the scene that the teamwork that the four of them had done, it was really key for this actually working. We're not really sure at this point if any Jedi would be able to pull this off, or if it just has to be like the right kind of group with the right kind of skills. Maybe that's something that maybe the four of them would be able to at least whittle down the number of the Nameless in the future. I don't know. It seems like kind of a tricky solution for it to have to be these four people that are doing it every time. So we'll see where that goes. While Vernestra is elsewhere on the planet chasing down the Drengir, she sees a Nameless and a Drengir fighting, and she goes to try to intervene and I guess kill them both. But then she realizes that Markion Ro is actually there because he gets in her way and tells her to not interfere. Turns out this is actually one of his experiments. And crazy enough, Markion doesn't actually try to kill her or stop her. He really just threatens her and then he just lets her get away. And I almost wondered if maybe that was because he just feels like she's not even worth his time. That was the best explanation I could come up with as to why he didn't even try to kill her. He just kind of let her go. But after that whole encounter happens, everybody makes it off the planet safely, even though, there were some close calls involved. But not long after this, Markion goes to Coruscant to meet with Lena So. And he acts like he's bringing news of a worse threat than the Nihil, kind of being like, yeah, this threat that's coming now, it's actually going to affect both of us. So we need to join forces and you need my help. But really, I mean, this threat of the blight, it is related to the Nihil. We haven't really been told exactly how yet, but to me, I mean, it has to be related. And he's just kind of putting on an act of acting like it's not related to try to, I don't know, get Lena So to do whatever he wants, maybe. But when he has this meeting with her, he has these flowers from another planet that was affected by the blight. And the flowers are all like, I mean, they're just all crumbled into ash, which is what the blight does. And so he brings these flowers to Coruscant and crumbles them, and then the wind blows the ashes away. And I wasn't sure if that means that now Coruscant is going to be affected by the blight, or if that was just him trying to show Lena So like, hey, this is what the blight does. I don't know if like the dried up flowers is enough to actually spread it or not. So that part was a little bit unclear to me, but I'm sure that that's going to be addressed pretty soon. But that is where the book ends. And so we're leaving off on a cliffhanger about the blight. I'm not really looking forward to the whole blight thing because I feel like it's just a little bit late to be introducing this, but I'm just going to go with it because I'm super excited that we have finally like made progress on understanding what exactly has to be done to be able to fight the Nameless. I also really like the direction it's going of realizing that the nameless are victims as well. Yes, the nameless victimize others, but they themselves are also victims too. And so I actually really liked how that was included in this story, that perspective. And I'm looking forward to seeing what exactly is going to be done with that going forward, especially with Buryaga, with his skill with emotions and empathy, and him being really the only one that's capable of at least leading a team against the nameless, and also simultaneously feeling sorry for them and recognizing the fact that they are victims. So I think that's like a really compelling direction for this to be going in. So I really liked that. So I'm still 100% on board. I really liked the way that this book kind of answered some questions that I feel like had been lingering for quite a while. I'm really excited about that. Even though I'm not super crazy about the blight, there's a lot of other things that I really like the direction that they're going in. But let me know what you thought about this book, or let me know if you're planning on reading this one. And let me know if this book changed your opinion on phase three so far. If you're happy in the direction that it's going, or if it made you a little nervous. But thanks so much for joining, y'all. I hope that y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.